Hello, I'm Scott Peterson, President of the Wisconsin Newspaper Association Foundation. Thank you for coming to today's Pylon ceremony. I know this is virtual, but this is as close as we can come right now to being on what I would call sacred ground for the Wisconsin Newspaper Association. For more than 70 years, members of the Wisconsin Newspaper Association and their families have traveled Eagle River for the association's annual retreat, a tradition that began in 1947. That was when Francis Schweinler, then publisher of the Mosinee Times, invited members of the Wisconsin Press Association, which is a forerunner of the WNA, to visit Trees for Tomorrow campus. The Natural Resources Specialty School had been founded just a few years earlier for the purpose of reforesting northern Wisconsin, as well as educating residents about the need for proper land management. Publishers returned year after year, learning about forestry and visiting nearby places of interest. It was during the 1956 outing that Hugh Hinderaker, publisher of the Lake Country Reporter in Heartland, had an idea. That idea was that the group purchase a tract of land in the area and set it up as a demonstration forest. It could be used as an outdoor study area for teachers and school children attending the Trees for Tomorrow camp, and publishers, families, and employees could also use it as a recreation area, while also practicing the forestry techniques they'd been learning about for decades. A year later, after soliciting $5 donations from all members of the association, the group purchased a 78-acre farm just south of Eagle River. Publishers quickly put their newfound forestry knowledge to use, transforming the abandoned fields no longer suitable for agriculture into what is now the WNA Press Forest. After nearly 30,000 trees were planted, one of the group's first projects was the development of a memorial grove to pay tribute to deceased industry leaders. Originally, they had planned to plant a tree as a memorial to each publisher, affiliate, or friend of the newspaper industry who had died. But it quickly became clear that there wouldn't be enough land to carry out that project beyond just a few years. So in 1962, they erected a memorial pylon to display the name of each deceased publisher, affiliate, or friend. Built in the form of a 20-foot-high scroll supported by a gigantic pencil, the monument expanded over the years. In 1980, it was redesigned and moved to the Trees for Tomorrow campus, where the names of deceased member publishers were printed on press plates and hung from wooden structures. Over time, the names began to fade, and in 2014, a more permanent monument was erected. Thanks to donor contributions and the sponsorship of the WNA Foundation, 5 granite pylons and several benches provided visitors a place to reflect on the contributions of the more than 600 individuals whose names are enshrined on the memorial. This year, the names of 26 industry leaders were etched into the granite, a testament to their contributions to newspapering in Wisconsin. During this program, we're stopping to look back at the lives of our most recent honorees and the legacies they left.
Margaret LeBlanc was born on November 12, 1927 in Crosby, Minnesota to George and Mary LeBlanc, one of 8 children. In 1946, she graduated from Crosby Ironton High School, and 2 years later, she married Robert D. Anderson on January 3, 1948. Together they had 8 children, 16 grandchildren, and 19 great-grandchildren. Peggy and Bob worked at the Crosby Ironton Courier and then owned and operated weekly newspapers in Royalton, Minnesota, Menominee Falls, and Sauk City in Wisconsin, and the Gulf Beach Journal in Florida. In 1975, they moved to Medford, where Peggy worked in production and Bob served as publisher of the Star News until 1992.
Peg was the wife of the publisher of the Star News when I knew her. And I was the wife of the publisher of the Tribune Phonograph in Abbotsford. And our husbands spent a lot of time together. And Peg and I, our job was to keep them from arguing politics and city business too loudly in public. We didn't succeed very often.
They were good friends, but they were on the opposite side of the political spectrum. And I think eventually they came closer together on their ideas and beliefs, because eventually they worked together to have the Star News transition over into our family. I knew Peg as a kid, and I remember coming back. They had an apartment built in the Star News, and I was so impressed because they had this bird that would fly around the apartment. And now my kids have a couple birds, but I don't let them fly around my house because I'm worried about accidents.
So, while they lived in the back of the Star News, quite often the staff would say that they had an awful problem working because Peg was always baking something pretty darn good smelling in the back room.
I know Peg enjoyed golfing. She enjoyed her grandchildren, and she was a fixture in the community of Medford for years. She stayed in Medford till the time of her death, so she made Medford her home and spent a lot of hours out on the golf course enjoying that too.
Very good memories of the time that I traveled with her as we traveled to conferences for the newspaper industry.
Thomas G. Besl was born on December 14, 1934, in La Crosse, Wisconsin, to Sylvester and Viola Besl. Upon graduation from La Crosse Aquinas High School in 1953, he joined the U.S. Air Force and served as a photographer following the Korean War. Tom returned to Wisconsin after his tour of duty and was hired as a printer at the Melrose Chronicle, a weekly newspaper about 30 minutes north of his hometown. It wasn't long after that he married his wife, Sandra, at Holy Trinity Catholic Church in La Crosse on June 10, 1959. A year later, the couple purchased the Melrose Chronicle and moved into an apartment above the newspaper's office. Tom took photos, reported on local news, and wrote a weekly column called Street Patter, which offered his view on everyday life through humor and storytelling. The couple raised 5 children together, and 20 years after they bought the Chronicle, they purchased a second paper, the Cashton Record. When Tom was diagnosed with Parkinson's later in life, he never lost a day to the disease. Instead, he lived his final years to the fullest, spending time with family and friends. Always the life of the party. Robert Lee Bradford II was born on November 4, 1938, in Bertha, Minnesota, to Robert Lee and Jean Bradford. As a teenager, Robert worked for his father, who owned the Moose Lake Star-Gazette, and he learned nearly every facet of the newspaper business. After graduating from Moose Lake High School and then the University of North Dakota in Grand Forks with a journalism degree, he went on to work as a reporter at the Austin Daily Herald in Minnesota. Eventually, he returned to work alongside his father in Moose Lake and later took over the Star-Gazette as publisher and owner. He married Betsy Oswald on July 14, 1962 in New Ulm, Minnesota, and the couple went on to have 3 children together. Before he retired in 1998, Bradford had owned 17 newspapers in Minnesota and Wisconsin, including the New Richmond News and the Burnett County Sentinel in Grantsburg, Wisconsin. He was a member of both state press associations, as well as several other clubs and societies, and he was named Publisher of the Year by the Wisconsin Newspaper Association in 1973. Robert was known as a brilliant and fastidious newspaper man, revered by his colleagues for always chasing the truth. In a story that was published by the Minneapolis Star-Tribune following his death in 2019, his brother Kurt said Robert believed that weeklies were a vital link to keeping small towns connected. He felt they were the heart, the pulse of those small towns, he said. Newspapering was in his blood.
Dan and Patsy Brandenburg and their daughter Angie purchased the Marion Advertiser on December 1st, 1985 from Leland Corny Krieger. The first day of owning the business saw one of the biggest snowstorms of the season, as the streets of Marion were almost impassable. However, that didn't stop Dan from getting to the Advertiser. After all, he had been employed since 1967, and now the business was his. Dan was hired in February 1967 and worked as a printer's devil, meaning he was the bottom of the totem pole. His first job was wrapping single newspapers in pre-addressed sheets of paper destined to out-of-state subscribers. Dan eventually began running the mail flatbed press, feeding in one sheet at a time. Dan loved living in Marion and enjoyed working at the Advertiser, so he enrolled in a 6-year apprenticeship and became a journeyman printer. In February of 2017, he did a column on how he had worked in the same career and the same place his whole life, which was now 50 years and continuing. He was so proud of this, as not many people can say that today. In his publisher's perspective, he said, "Let me do the math. 50 years times 52 issues per year equals 2,600 editions of the Marion Advertiser since he started." Dan could be found at the printing office 7 days a week, not always working, as many times people stop in to say hi and visit, or he would be sitting back by his desk chair watching his beloved Packers or some golf. In 1985, the Brandenburgs put on a 3-day celebration to celebrate the Marion Advertiser's 100th birthday. They served up hamburgers, brats, hot dogs, cake, and drinks. They joked the next 100th we will probably only do a 1-day event. Dan enjoyed not only the Marion community, but all the surrounding areas, attending many area community events, both to support them and for pictures and stories. Tuesday was his favorite day, when he would go out and deliver papers. This gave him the opportunity to visit with people in all the surrounding communities, along with seeing the beautiful countryside and a chance to take some awesome pictures. People enjoyed his sense of humor, as you can see when he joined in on a photo he was supposed to be taking, or his picture he shared when it was back to school time. Dan loved his family most of all, and it was a chance of a lifetime to work side by side with them. Although he could enter numerous newspaper contests throughout the years in business, he chose to produce the best newspaper in the country, and he always said if his subscribers were happy, that was the most important thing to him and the best award. Dan would still be behind his desk today, producing the weekly paper, if it wasn't for cancer. He was diagnosed with cancer in early 2017 and passed away in August of 2019. He never missed a day or a paper through all of his treatments. Some people would say cancer won, but not Dan. He won, getting the greatest gift of all, eternal life. Today, Sarah Chischhauser continues to bring good news to the local area through the Marion Advertiser and continues the tradition which was so important to Dan, keeping the paper a community newspaper.
James Michael Brayer was born on June 17, 1945 in Milwaukee, to John and Irma Brayer. Upon graduating from Columbus High School in 1963, he earned his journalism degree from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. In 1967, he joined the U.S. Army, serving as an information specialist and assistant editor of his division's weekly newspaper during the Vietnam War. On August 24, 1958, after returning home from the war, James married the love of his life, Kathy Weichelt, with whom he'd raised 2 children. In 1975, after working in roles at Montgomery Ward and the Marshfield News-Herald, James and 3 business partners launched a statewide agriculture newspaper. Agri-View first debuted on June 20th, 1975. It was initially called Dairyland Agri-View and heralded as the news and views of Wisconsin agribusiness. The first issue went to more than 17,000 farms in 10 counties in north central Wisconsin. As advertising director, James was integral to the paper's growth and known for his tireless work ethic. It showed. After 6 years, the newspaper was serving 74,000 readers. In 1990, Agri-View was sold to Krause Publications of Iola and eventually purchased by Capital Newspapers in Madison. It's now part of Lee Enterprises' division of farm publications. Years after the sale, James and Kathy moved to Rhinelander, where he continued putting his entrepreneurial skills to use and launched a successful telecommunications business. In 2005, the couple moved to Green Valley, Arizona, where they enjoyed many fun-filled years in retirement. Joan Catherine Pritzlaff was born on July 31, 1931 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, to Valdemar and Florence Pritzlaff. After graduating from Oconomowoc High School in 1949, she earned a degree in biology from Carroll College and went on to work as a medical technologist for Milwaukee County General Hospital. On June 10, 1954, Joan met Bruce C. Brown, co-publisher of the Oconomowoc Enterprise, while out dancing. They were married later that year, on November 20th at St. Paul's Lutheran Church. The couple shared a love of lakeside living and sailing, and traveled globally, often on trips arranged by the National Newspaper Association. During the time they owned the paper, Bruce was in charge of commercial printing operations. Joan also wrote a humorous column for the newspaper titled, "I Must Be Nuts." Brown was also known for her philanthropic efforts. She was a co-founder of the Oconomowoc Area Foundation, volunteered with the Oconomowoc Rotary, and was instrumental in the development of the YMCA at Pep's Farm. Despite her many accomplishments in journalism and philanthropy, she always remained grounded and humble. In an article published following her death last year, a friend said the following about Joan. She bridged generations with humor and grace. She believed life should be celebrated, family embraced, and those fleeting, gleeful moments treasured and perpetuated. Frank W. Christopherson, Jr. was born on May 24, 1927 in Superior, Wisconsin, to Frank and Yvonne Christopherson. 2 years later, also in Superior, Marilyn J. Long was born on October 10th to Milton and Etta Long. Upon graduating from high school, both Frank and Marilyn attended Superior State College. He also went on to serve in the U.S. Army Air Corps during World War II. The two were married in May of 1950. From then on, life became a series of team efforts. When Frank, an engineer with the Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railroad, made his bid for state senate and assembly seats, Marilyn was his campaign manager. Their efforts saw Frank serve as a member of the legislature from 1959 to 1967. In the 1960s, when the couple bought the Iron River Pioneer and the Bayfield Press, he took over as publisher, and she became editor. Along the way, they also raised 5 children and spent countless hours volunteering in their community. In a 2008 story about their volunteer work, the couple was described as 2 in a million. The story went on. They give without any expectation of getting anything back, and they're inseparable in terms of their devotion.
Hello, my name is Alyssa Rose, and I'm the daughter of Steve Ciccantelli. I would like to share with you a few words about Steve and his career. Steve was a devout and loving husband, father, and grandfather. His laugh could light up a room, and his sense of humor always had people in stitches. He was the most intelligent person I had the pleasure of knowing, and enjoyed sharing his love of history and random knowledge with everyone. He certainly was the type of person you wanted on your team during a game of Trivial Pursuit. He loved sports and was a diehard Packers and Brewers fan. Besides his family, one of his biggest passions in life was spending time at our lake house and being on the water. He loved taking boat rides, swimming, and entertaining friends and family at what he liked to call his happy place. My father had a fighting spirit, and that was apparent to anyone that met him. Unfortunately, on June 15th of 2020, my father lost his long-fought 25-plus-year battle with cancer. I hope his fighting spirit and determination can serve as a reminder to everyone to live each day to the fullest. My father, Steve, was an extremely driven and passionate person. He started his career in the newspaper industry in 1987 at the News Graphic in Cedarburg, Wisconsin. He continued to grow within the Lakeshore newspaper organization and in 1990 took on the role of advertising director. In 1997, he became publisher of the West Bend Daily News and sales director for Conley Media Group, while also continuing his role as publisher of the Daily News. In 2003, he was promoted to Vice President of Advertising and Sales for Conley Media Group. In 2012, he made the decision to retire from the company in order to spend more time with his family. After I graduated college, I got the honor and privilege to work for the same company as my father. I guess the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. I got to witness firsthand what a brilliant teacher and resource he was for everyone in the organization. People respected his opinion and sought him out for advice. They may not have always agreed with what he had to say, but I think it speaks volumes that people kept coming back to him for guidance. For myself, just starting out in my career, it was so special for me to witness my father at work, and that made me want to be just like my dad as I started to enter the corporate world. My father was an inspiration to so many people, myself included. He helped shape my career in life in so many ways, and although he is gone, his legacy and the impact he had on this industry lives on. My family would like to thank the Wisconsin Newspaper Association for honoring his career and the impact he had on the community.
It's hard to know what to say about somebody like Jim because he was truly larger than life. Jim was a great explorer. He loved going on all sorts of expeditions throughout his life. He visited many continents, and he would immerse himself in the arts and culture of every continent and every group of people that he ran into. He very much enjoyed the journey. And so since his passing, I've taken a few trips. And of course, the first thing I do is I put Sari on and we're driving down the road and I'm, listening to her intently. And I noticed that because with Jim, it was an entirely different experience because he believed he had an internal GPS system. And he believed that he had this internal compass where he could just land places and he would never have to check a map. So 9 times out of 10, that worked because unlike myself, he did have an internal GPS system. So I remember one time it sticks in my mind because Brant was with us and we were going, I think, to Santa Fe. And I had taken the wrong turn, probably. And there we were driving and it was getting dark and we were looking for a new hotel that Jim wanted to experience. And I'm like, where do we go from here? Jim and me like, take this turn. And so we drove off while then from the back seat, I hear Brant say, Dad, I'll just ask Sari. Oh, I can't believe you would ask someone else. Don't you understand? This is about the journey, not the trip. This is just so typical of Jim because Jim Conley knew exactly who he was. At any given moment, at any given time, Jim Conley was Jim Conley. And everybody that met him knew that he didn't try to be like anybody else. He knew exactly where he was at any given time. And I think about this because I go on trips now, and it is my first response as soon as I close that car door to turn Sari on. And I think, damn, that was fun with Jim. Some of those trips we would see sunflower fields, we would go down and we would find the best little antique shop or something. And I think, he was right. He was so right about so many things, but that he was in particular right, man. You really have to enjoy the journey, because the trip, well, it's just the trip, but the journey, that's really what it's all about. I think that Jim was always very, very proud of being a newspaper publisher, and he was very proud of the communities that he served, and he felt that it was a higher calling, and he believed that it was the most important thing to get news to his readers. I think the one thing that most people remember is just his genuine kindness to people. He did not believe in walking by anybody in need. He started many different charitable organizations over the course of his life. He believed that if you could and you were in a position, you should try to help people. And a lot of people say that, but they don't do it. But Jim really, he put his money where his mouth was there and really made an effort to make people's lives easier. Everything from never walking by somebody on the street that asked for money. He would always give them money, whatever was in his, it didn't matter if it was $100 that came out of his wallet, he gave it to them. He started a program in Beaver Dam for clothes for school children. And he started scholarship foundations, and he just really felt that you had an overall duty to make your community a better place.
I think the thing I'll remember most about my dad is how he supported me just throughout. When in high school, there were like a lot of different career options for me. And ultimately, I decided that the thing I wanted to pursue was music. And a lot of parents would look at music and they'd be like, this is not exactly, the most, I guess, conventional. It's not engineering. It's not necessarily the thing most parents aspire their kids to go into college for. But yet, despite that, he's always supported me to do music. And, despite later on deciding to change my major to finance, throughout really all of my life, he always supported me with really whatever I wanted to do.
He believed that people had a right to get news in their communities, and he wanted to be part of that journey for them. So.
Hi, this is Carl DeWitt here, and I'm in Glenwood, Wisconsin, and I want to thank the Wisconsin Newspaper Association for paying honor to my late wife, Paula Jean. When her and I first got married so many years ago, we both knew that newspaper work and printing would be life's work. And when we bought the newspaper from my parents back in 1975, she became the bookkeeper, the receptionist, the proofreader, and she wrote the files for from years ago. But she was also interested in community events and community affairs, and she volunteered for many of them. She was a Sunday school teacher, she was president of the community club, but she was the community's first emergency medical technician. And she served on the ambulance for 44 years, and she went on over 1,000 runs. After her passing, memorial funds were sent in her name that donated over $35,000 to local events, most of it came to the ambulance. On her tombstone are inscribed the words, "Free press, free people." And again, thank you.
After graduating from the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater with a Bachelor of Arts degree in journalism and marketing, James purchased the Banner Journal in Black River Falls, Wisconsin, and became the owner and publisher. James oversaw and participated in all facets of the operation, including writing, editing, photography, advertising, sales, and designs, as well as the production of the newspaper and special sections. He was also very active in the community, proudly serving in the National Guards. He served as a Jackson County Board Supervisor and was a member of both the Chamber of Commerce and the Lions Club. From 1971 through 1978, the Banner Journal became an award-winning weekly newspaper with a circulation of 5,000 subscribers. In 1976, James was selected for the Wisconsin Men of Achievement Award for his considerable personal and professional contributions to the growth of the state of Wisconsin. Although James enjoyed everything about owning and running the Banner Journal, his greatest joy came from writing. Whether it was a local or national event that he was writing about, he took great responsibility to be accurate, fair, and thoughtful. James was often inspired to editorialize about current and past events, and it was because of this James introduced his Just Jim column. The Just Jim column allowed James to voice his opinion with the highest level of professional integrity. In 1978, James sold the Banner Journal and with his family moved to Yuma, Arizona to become the sports editor of the Yuma Daily Sun. James designed the sports section for a circulation of 35,000 subscribers. He also served as a columnist covering professional and collegiate sports. As a columnist, he continued his Just Jim column. He had an uncanny way of getting interviews with high-profile athletes like Hank Aaron, Arnold Palmer, and Reggie Jackson, and getting them to discuss topics that they had never discussed with a reporter before. On one occasion, after Hank Aaron did not receive a unanimous selection into the Major League Baseball Hall of Fame, James wrote an article voicing his opinion of the vote. 10 years later, he ran into Hank Aaron at a minor league promotional game, and Hank Aaron thanked him for the kind words that James had written about him, and that a framed copy of the Just Jim article was hanging in his office. As much as James enjoyed meeting and interviewing professional athletes and coaches, he equally, and maybe a little bit more, enjoyed interviewing the local college coaches and players. He took great joy in writing about the personal side of the coaches and athletes. Aside from his responsibilities at the Yuma Daily Sun, James was very involved in local youth sports programs and once served as the president and district commissioner of the Yuma Babe Ruth Baseball League. In 1984, James, once again searching for new challenges, left the Yuma Daily Sun to become the public relations and marketing director for the Yuma Regional Medical Center. James served on the senior management team. He helped create, manage, and implement a marketing strategy designed to recruit superior medical care talent and expand healthcare programs and services, and to improve the public image of the acute care medical center. In 1989, James was once again searching for new challenges and moved his family from Yuma, Arizona to Phoenix, Arizona to become the executive director of the Arizona Insurance Information Association. As the director, he managed and directed a not-for-profit information association dedicated to strengthening public knowledge of the property and casualty insurance industry. His targeted markets included media, legislative analysts, member companies, industry lobbyists, government regulators, national trade associations, traffic safety advocates, and the general public. He helped create and co-chaired the Arizona DUI Task Force, facilitated in the creation of the Arizona Department of Insurance Fraud Unit, and assisted in creating the Arizona Auto Theft Authority, and was appointed to serve on the Governor's Traffic Safety Advisory Council. On behalf of the Frederickson family, we thank you for this acknowledgement of his achievements, and we know that James would be honored.
Mary Ann Pesch was born on October 6, 1928 in Peshtigo, Wisconsin, to Leo and Anna Pesch. Mary Ann's father was owner and editor of the Peshtigo Times, and she started working at the newspaper at the young age of 9, making 10 cents an hour. By the time she was 14, she was starting to help with the bookkeeping. After graduating from Peshtigo High School and Marquette University, she married Charles Garden on March 31st, 1951 at St. Mary's Catholic Church in Peshtigo. They went on to have 12 children together. Mary Ann became editor of the newspaper in 1981 after her father passed away and continued working there until after her 90th birthday. Even at the age of 90, she continued to edit news, assign reporters stories, and handle most of the billing. And she always took the time to chat with friends and customers who stopped by the office.
Thank you very much for your kind remembrance of John and your tribute by enshrining his name on the Memorial Pylon. We remember John as a man with a strong faith in Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior. His life goal was to do everything in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him. John's goal at the Galesville Republican was to provide our community with the best in local news and event coverage. WNA was very important to John. He became an active member soon after purchasing the Galesville Republican. He was grateful for the many benefits he received: advice from other publishers, help from the Freedom of Information hotline on legal issues and questions, the chance to be involved in committees and attend conventions, and health insurance for his family through the WNA group plan. After selling the newspaper in 2010, he continued to do freelance pre-press work, and it was his pleasure to be able to help several WNA friends who had unexpected staffing needs at their newspapers. He compiled his paragraphs columns into a book and continued to love working on layout and design. John attended nearly every Trees for Tomorrow workshop during his newspaper career, and we always looked forward to those events. I enjoyed attending with him and was privileged to know his colleagues. Our children and I appreciate this tribute to John and thank you for this memorial.
Hi, Chris O'Leary
And Carol O'Leary.
and we just wanted to mention our thanks to John Graff. We got to know John through the WNA and especially up at Trees where we'd spend weekends. And he was a fixture there, and feel bad we're not up there in person to celebrate his life. Hopefully we can get up there next year and do that. We're very thankful for John because when we were going through a transition at our Cornell paper, he offered to step in and train our staff there because we didn't have the time and we had no editor or anyone really in charge. So he was really good working with our staff and explaining to them the newspaper industry and why we do things the way we do, which is great to hear from somebody besides the bosses, because sometimes they're like, why are we doing that? And he could explain again why you have to do things for a certain reason.
And to Lois, we thank you so much for all the times that you let us have John for the week. It was really a wonderful thing for him to have done for us at our time that we needed him. Very much appreciated it. Our sympathies. We really lost a good friend.
Yeah, we wish we could give you a hug. So hopefully next year we'll be able to do that in person. Thank you.
Greetings from Andrew Johnson. I'm a retired publisher of 3 small community weekly newspapers in Wisconsin. I'm also the past president of the Wisconsin Newspaper Association and the National Newspaper Association. It is a special honor for me to say a few words in remembrance of my good friend, Bill Hale, at this virtual pylon ceremony normally held at Trees for Tomorrow in Eagle River. It is a place that Bill really liked to go to, and he really loved and encouraged participation at Trees for Tomorrow. Different publishers contribute to their communities and to the newspaper industry's different ways. For me, Bill Hale's gift was mentoring other newspaper people and people on his own team. It really stands out what he did for mentoring. He was very special to me. I'd like to read a letter that I drafted to nominate Bill to be entered into the Wisconsin Newspaper Association Foundation Hall of Fame. Bill made a significant contribution to the Wisconsin newspaper industry in the late 80s and early 90s through his effective mentoring of people interested in improving their operation or skills in the newspaper business. He made people a high priority and treated many as close friends. He took the time in developing specific skills among his own staff members and in helping editors and publishers run better newspapers. He always welcomed visitors to see his operation and would even travel to other papers across the state to help if needed. When I became a publisher in 1988, I realized right away I needed a mentor to help guide me with the particulars of running a small weekly newspaper, even though I came from a newspaper family. I sought out a publisher with the Wisconsin Newspaper Association, and they recommended to me Bill Hale from Lancaster, Wisconsin, and he came to the rescue right when I called him. He was glad to help. I went to his paper several times, seeking advice on just about everything, including writing, profit and loss statements, evaluations, how to bid job printing, and utilization of color. We talked about anything to do with newspapers. He taught me the nuts and bolts of the business at a ground level. He would genuinely loved the business and enjoyed helping others, even those not in the business. We ended up becoming good friends and saw each other several times until he retired and moved to Florida. I know he also did the same for many other newspapers, people, as well as his own team members that worked for him. He had a great influence on the industry by mentoring one person at a time. The industry will be forever indebted to Bill Hale's generosity and kindness. I am forever grateful for Bill. He also, in closing, I'd like to say that he had a great sense of humor. He was a classy guy, always dressed really sharp in business. He was a WNA board member, and he was a true friend. I honor Bill Hale today, an awesome person. Thank you.
We wanted to tell a few anecdotes about Bill Hale, how we mostly traveling with him on inland work study missions. I know Chris got to travel with him in Africa, and I did too. And then one of my particular memories of him was when we were in the Amazon, and he and his wife Jo came decked out because they'd heard that you should be protected against mosquitoes and other insects, completely decked out in looked like beekeeper outfits. None of the rest of us got any bug problems, but they sure looked funny.
And like my mom said, I got to know Bill well during our 18 days in Africa, traveling around with him and his wife, and it was a privilege to get to know him and Joe, and they were wonderful people, and we had a good time getting to know them better outside the newspaper industry, doing newspaper things, but getting to know them more on a personal level too.
Hans Ham was born on April 1st, 1924 in Milwaukee, to Victor Carl and Pearl Morgan Ham. He attended Riverside High School before majoring in engineering at the University of Wisconsin. It was in Madison that Hans met his future wife, Joan Yaumans, whom he married in 1945. Following a brief engineering career, he joined the Freeman, where his mother-in-law, Josephine Yaumans, was publisher. Over the years, he held several positions at the newspaper, including business manager and advertising director, and came to know the pulse of Waukesha's downtown business economy. Hans and Joan were among the co-owners of the family-owned newspaper until it was sold in 1979 to the Des Moines Register and Tribune Company. A stickler for grammar, Hans reminded his family for years of how he was on a mission to keep alive the use of the semicolon. Hans was a strong believer in giving back to the community, serving several years on the Waukesha Memorial Hospital Board and heading up the United Way Fund Drive. He also served as president of the Waukesha YMCA. In retirement, Hans spent a lot of time with his family and enjoyed cooking and baking and sending handwritten cards. Hans and Joan had 8 children whom they raised in Waukesha. In a letter he wrote Joan on their 20th anniversary, he said, When they look back on old Hans and Joan many years from now, I'm sure that only one accomplishment will be recalled. Certainly, that will be our large and wonderful family.
Our parents' journey into the printing and newspaper industry began back in the 1950s after our father graduated from the Dunwoody Institute in Minnesota. After he completed his studies, he took on a commercial printing job in Minneapolis. The start of his new trade, however, was interrupted by 2 years of active duty in the Navy. When he completed his time in the Navy, he returned to Minnesota and began working for a newspaper in Albert Lea. It was this job that really developed his passion for journalism and printing. After working in Albert Lea for 2 years, he decided to purchase his first newspaper in Minnesota Lake. As the story goes, when he purchased the paper, he was told that he needed to move it out of the basement of a hardware store. Luckily, the mechanical people that he worked with in Albert Lea came to the rescue and helped tear down the old machines and move them to the new location. Another stroke of luck that our father had during that time is he started dating the light of his life, Jean McGuire, who eventually agreed to become Jean Hess. Together, they built the Minnesota Lake newspaper up to a higher level. And after several years, they decided it was time to take on another challenge by buying a newspaper in a new state when they decided to purchase the Loyal Tribune in Loyal, Wisconsin. While working together at the Tribune, they found out that our mother had a true passion for sales, which helped to build the newspaper by increasing sales over the period of time that they owned it. But once again, they decided it was time for a change. And as luck would have it, they were able to find the perfect people to continue the Loyal Tribune and also to make it stronger by combining several weekly newspapers together to form the Loyal Tribune Record Gleaner. Those owners were Robert and Florence Berglund. With the decision to sell the newspaper, Dad was not ready to get out of the printing business, however. When they were constructing our new house, one of the specifications they needed was a basement that could house printing presses. I'm not sure how many kids were ever able to say that they ran a printing press, much less say that they had a printing press in their basement. But my brother and I were very lucky to say both. Our parents continued their entrepreneurial ways of running businesses, with my dad taking over an insurance agency in Loyal and my mother starting a clothing store. Eventually, our mother sold the clothing store and our parents joined forces again, working together in the insurance agency, which they did for a number of years. As time went by, my dad was offered the opportunity to run 2 small-town mutual insurance companies while my mother continued the agency that they had built up together. Eventually, they retired to spend more time with family and friends. Our parents enjoyed working together in the newspaper and printing industry, and I strongly believe that helped form a great foundation for our lives as a family.
For 18 years, Nora Krieger was a key player in running the Marion Advertiser with her husband, Leland Corney Krieger. The print shop was established in 1895. Corny worked there as an 11-year-old and returned to buy it with his beloved wife Nora in the 1960s. Nora was a mom, bookkeeper, extraordinary cook, a champion golfer, avid bridge player with a group of women in her community for many years, a kind, gentle, and steadfast soul who loved furiously. She nursed one of her daughters through a horrible burn injury. Nora's faith in the Lord Jesus Christ got her through the trials and triumphs of her 87 years on this side of heaven. She raised 4 children who all worked with them in the family business, and all 4 continued on in some aspect of printing and publishing. Nora was the rock in her family because she stood on the rock of faith.
It's a funny thing about how life will come full circle. I can still recall the day when a young kid, not long out of school, came to persuade me to hire him. I was the managing editor at the Lake Country Reporter, and he wanted a job in my newsroom. He was a few years out of the University of Wisconsin, Oshkosh, but he'd been unable to find a job in journalism, and so he was selling insurance, and he hated it. I had seen this before. He was trying to sell me on him, and I was reluctant. Journalism is a hard master, and you have to love it deeply if you want to be in this field. But he was a good salesman. He had charisma, and I could tell he had a strong character. So I hired him. He was the editor of the Oconomowoc Focus, and his name was Steve Lyles, and he did a hell of a job. He tossed out the book on how this job had always been done and chose instead to do it how he thought it should be done. He was great. Before long, his career was on the rise. He married another one of my employees as well, Carrie, the woman who was our special section intern, and everything was going right. With a growing family to be concerned about, he decided to go from news into ad sales, where he excelled. He was selling a product he loved, after all, the newspaper. Before long, he was manager, and eventually he was publisher. And one thing led to another, and the guy who begged me to hire him was now my boss. What goes around comes around. We both had the same outlook on life, and when we fought, as Hugh McGarry at the Journal used to say, we fought like brothers. We were close. He was indeed the brother I never had. As our papers got deeper into Journal Sentinel's reach, Steve rose to the sales and management ranks, and I followed him in the editorial ranks. He was the best leader I ever knew. He could take the most difficult and confusing journeys and help you find a clear path through it all. He worked hard and would not take guff from anyone, but he also knew how to have fun and how to take care of people. He and I learned more and more about the business with each other. We took many business trips together, going not only to WNA conventions, but Suburban Newspaper Association, now called Local Media Association, and went to conventions in Minneapolis, Denver, Atlanta, and Philadelphia, and we always found a way to do not only newspaper work, but to find something fun as well to do on the trip. There was never a dull moment when Steve was around. He hated to be bored, and he was always looking for the next big thing. He would have been a hell of a tour guide if he so chose, but thankfully he chose newspapers. He was good at a lot of things, not just editor, sales manager, publisher, but he was also a basketball referee, usually drawing the honor of officiating the state basketball tournaments in Madison for the WIAA. And he loved to landscape, he loved to hunt, he loved to storm chase, and he loved his wife and adored his daughters. And the thing about Steve is that you always knew where he stood. He was always a man of God, and he always treated others with respect and fairness. He had a moral compass that was as accurate as anyone I know. But he was never preachy or never overbearing. His faith was like an anchor, like a rock that kept him steady. As time went on, it became harder and harder for us to find our way to grow at the place we were. So he moved to a different field. I moved to a different newspaper. We remained friends and talked often, but I will never forget the day that Debbie, a colleague of mine at Journal-Sentinel, called me to say that Steve Lyles had died suddenly at work after a brief workout exercise. I could not believe it. He was only 50 years old, and it just seemed impossible. No one saw it coming. And after the funeral, I would go for weeks reaching for the phone to tell him some news or seek some insight from him, only to get snapped back to reality. I did not want to believe that he was no longer around. But I'll always carry Steve with me wherever I go. He taught me about setting goals, about the difference between being an administrator and a leader, about how to carry myself as a manager, about how the little things matter when dealing with people, and about how to be a success. Steve is no longer on earth with us, but I'm sure his family and friends would agree that we all take a little bit of him with us wherever we go, and it always helps me find my way again. There are not many people in the world like Steve Lyles, but we're all doing our best to share his outlook with everything we do. We miss you, Steve. Thanks.
Daniel M. Magliore was born May 10, 1970 in Chicago to Tony and Joyce Magliore. He attended high school in Waukesha, and in June of 1997 got his start in the newspaper industry as an account executive for Ad Inc. and the Buyer's Guide Group in Waukesha. Dan stayed on with the company after it was acquired by Journal Community Publishing Group in 2003, serving as the sales manager as well as in other roles. He later took a similar position with the Waukesha-based multimedia channels and, in December of 2015, joined the Washara Argus. 6 months later, he was named publisher of the Wautoma newspaper. At the time of his death, in January of 2020, Dan was working in sales at the Advertiser and Times Press in Seymour. In a column written by his co-workers, they recounted the following about Dan. He shared many, many stories of his son, and with each story, there was a proud daddy smile. He had an infectious smile and used it often. It was his quick wit and sarcastic manner that made him a people person, they noted, which, in turn, made him a great salesman.
He was a big, loud, intimidating man. Everyone who knew him, even his family, called him Big Jim. It was not an exaggeration. He had a personality as big as any room he was in, as big as the newspaper office, as big as the newspaper, and as big as the community that paper served. Everyone knew him, and whether they liked him or not, he was a presence. He was a celebrity in Lake Country back in a time when newspaper publishers somehow had the ability to be famous in their own right. And into this world, a 21-year-old kid, right out of college, so dumb he didn't even know how dumb he was, but he had the courage and showed enough promise that Big Jim gave him his first break. That guy was me. I just lost out on a job at the Monroe Evening Times, and if I hadn't done a stringing job for the Milwaukee Sentinel the night before in Jim's backyard, I might have driven to Hartford instead of Heartland by mistake. Jim was never short on bravado, and during the interview, he told me everything that was wrong with my story. He was testing me, pushing me, of course. He wanted to see how I'd react. I don't know what I said, but Jim somehow liked what he saw. The rumor was that Phyllis Roth, the managing editor, is the one who really liked me, and she talked Jim into hiring me. But regardless, somehow he hired me, and 41 years later, I am towards the end of the best career anyone could ever want. Jim taught me so much, and I soaked it up like newsprint. I learned how to make a good story interesting, what kind of things got people talking, and about how to work with others, and how in a small town it's not about politics, but about people, and you have to learn to get along with all stripes. And I learned that not only did I have to get things right, but I definitely did not want to get Jim angry. One day I misspelled the name of Linda McIsaac. She was a school district administrator, and I had mentioned her names many times in a 70-inch story, back in the days when you could write 70-inch stories. And to this day, I can't remember if her name was spelled with 2 S's or 2 A's, but whatever it was, I did it wrong. This was the days when reporters did not have word processors. They typed on a typewriter, handed it to an editor to edit, and then the editor gave it to a typesetter, who typed it in a key punch machine without a screen that created a tape with holes in it that was fed into another machine that generated film and spit out a whole galley, a long stripe of a story that was 1 column wide. And any mistake that was made had to be replaced by hand with someone using an X-Acto knife and cutting and pasting 1 line at a time into every place there was an error in that story. Marge, the proofreader, had marked with blue pen every error, which was going to be hours of tedious work to repair. I quickly learned that time was money. Well, Jim came storming down from his office and held this galley up in the air in the newsroom. It was like the head of Medusa, so scary no one wanted to look at it. And he bellowed in the voice that only Jim could do, "I don't know who misspelled this name of Linda McIsaac, but whoever it is, they should be fired." Of course, Jim knew exactly who had done this. All he had to do if he wanted to was look into the corner where my desk was by the electrical boxes and see a reporter whimper him like a puppy who had just soiled the carpet. Thankfully, Jim never fired me, but he saw that I learned from my mistakes. He treated those who were loyal to him very well. This was back in the days when publishers like Jim made non-interest loans or gave outright cash gifts to staff members who were in a tight spot, and I saw Jim do this many times, and it was amazing to see. He treated my wife and our young children like they were grandchildren. He was like a second father to me. He gave me every opportunity, and I did my best to show that I deserved his respect and the privilege he awarded me. And his wife, Mary, whom we also honor today, was the sweetest woman you would ever want to know. She was a woman of high character and someone whom Jim loved and deeply respected. She always let Jim lead, but she always had Jim's ear. She had a silent strength that is so underappreciated in these bold and brash days. And even in her 90s, she always had this radiance about her. She just seemed to glow. I can't say enough good things about Mary. Jim and Mary sold the newspaper in 1990 to Journal Communications. He had multiple offers, but he was the owner of a newspaper in the heart of Lake Country, one of the fastest growing and most affluent areas of Waukesha County in the whole state. He chose to sell the Journal because he knew they would take the best care of his employees. And he was right. Jim always looked at his newspaper like they were his family. Soon after this, another chapter would be written for the employees, but no one would forget the Jim McClune era. In Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, Ebenezer Scrooge looks back on his career and his Christmas past, and he recalls fondly the time with old Fezziwig and just how wonderful those days were. And that's how I think, and many of his my co-workers felt as well. That was Big Jim. In his era, it was such hard work, but it was so much fun. Newspapers were revered, and it was an honor to work for them. Jim, I think, had 8 children, but in many ways, all of his employees were like his children. We were all family. And it was such a great way to start a career. I will never forget the golden era and the larger-than-life guy who made it happen. Big Jim and his dear wife, Mary. Jim, I'll raise this glass of Jim Beam. Somewhere in heaven you are sipping on a Manhattan, and I hope you're looking down fondly at how much you changed the world and all of us. You are very much missed. Thank you.
Ernest Richard Moore was born June 1st, 1956, in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, to Howard William and Anna Adeline Moore. He grew up in Ironwood, Michigan, and graduated from Luther L. Wright High School in 1974. After high school, Ernie earned a technical printing degree in Green Bay and a bachelor's degree at Winona State University in Minnesota. He later earned an MBA from Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah. Ernie served in the U.S. Army and was stationed in Anchorage, Alaska, where he met his wife, Carla Eccles. They were married on September 24th, 1980, in the Salt Lake City Temple of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Together, they had 8 children. In 1992, Ernie succeeded his father, Howard Bill Moore, as publisher of the Iron County Miner. Bill, along with 2 partners, had purchased the newspaper in 1970 and took sole ownership 3 years later. The newspaper remains in the family today, with Ernie's son, Michael, serving as publisher.
Marjorie G. Curry was born on May 10, 1924, in Ekdahl, Wisconsin, to Walter and Olive Curry. She attended Polk County Teachers College in St. Croix Falls and earned her degree at what is now UW Superior. Marge married Bill Nelson, and they had 3 children together. In 1962, while living in Minnesota, Bill had a printing job and she was teaching. The couple heard that the Journal of Burnett County had ceased publication, leaving the county without a newspaper. Before she retired in 2008, Marge captured what came next on their journey in her final column. Here is some of what she wrote. It is with very mixed emotion that I will put my pen in the inkwell for the last time when I write this column. Through the years, I have written many columns in addition to a variety of feature stories, reports of the school and county board meetings, and many general news releases. They all required deadlines and a certain amount of stress. Stress and newspapering go together. I will miss those deadlines since I work well under pressure, knowing that things must get done at a given time. Several readers have asked me to write something about the history of our newspaper, so I will touch on it lightly when, in reality, the story of the Nelsons' Burnett County Sentinel could fill a book. I am most proud that my husband, the late Wilbur A. Bill Nelson, established a newspaper for Burnett County when none existed. Losing a newspaper is, in essence, the loss of identity. A newspaper is the hub of county and community business, social, and various other aspects of daily life. It is also an ongoing historical record. Without a newspaper, a county and its people lose their clout. She goes on to discuss the decision to come to Wisconsin. Marge writes, "It is not often one can live a dream, and his was becoming a country editor. So after soliciting support from county businesses and the general public, we moved from Woodbury, Minnesota to Grantsburg, Wisconsin, my hometown and the home of my parents. We learned a lot through attending Wisconsin Newspaper Association conventions in Madison, Wausau, Green Bay, and other locations around the state. We attended all sessions, each going to different ones, taking notes, and then comparing and discussing what we had learned about the community newspaper business. Getting to know other publishers and editors around the state and comparing notes was also valuable in our education process." Bill died on March 1st, 1975 at the age of 56. I continued to publish the newspaper until 1989 when I sold it to our son Gary, who published it until he sold it in 1994. Bill's name remains on the pylon of the Wisconsin Newspaper Association's Trees for Tomorrow Memorial at Eagle River, with many other fine state journalists who had kept the public informed over their career. My name will also be added to that pylon upon my passing, and I consider that a great honor and a lasting memorial.
Stanton P. Sturry was born on August 18, 1931 in Monroe, Wisconsin, to Helen Elizabeth and Peter Sturry. He grew up in a family of newspaper trailblazers and became one himself. His grandmother went to work as a correspondent for the Janesville Gazette at the age of 16. His mother followed suit and began corresponding for area newspapers while in high school. Stanton, too, began his newspaper career in high school, working at the Albany Herald and later as an office boy for the Janesville Gazette. He went on to study printing at the Milwaukee Vocational School and worked for the Orfordville Journal and the Albany Herald. When he bought the Monroe paper in 1951, at the age of 21, he became the youngest newspaper owner in the state. Stanton married Barbara Ann Smout in September of 1952. She, along with his mother, would help run the Herald until 1961 when he was called into active duty in the U.S. Army and had to sell the paper. Upon his return from service, he took a job with the Monroe Times, where he worked until 1975, serving as a production manager and acting editor. After his newspaper career, Stanton moved west and went on to work in a variety of fields, including one as a real estate agent, Methodist pastor, and a car dealer. He also did police work, and, along with his beloved German Shepherd Maggie, he was very active in Rocky Mountain search and rescue. Stanton and his wife, Barbara, had 3 children, 8 grandchildren, and 28 great-grandchildren.
Thank you to all those who took a moment to share their memories for this program. You can see the list of all the names currently enshrined on the pylons at the WNA Memorial Grove by visiting the Trees for Tomorrow campus in Eagle River, or by accessing your virtual pylon on the WNA's website, wnanews.com. The virtual pylon, which aims to document the lives and contributions of more than 600 inductees, is an ongoing effort by WNA staff. If you'd like to help in this effort, I encourage you to visit the pylon page on the website to learn more. Thank you again, and if you get the chance, please come to Trees for Tomorrow and visit the sacred ground of WNA, the place that has so much history and so much meaning for people in our business. Thanks again.